The night that homeless boy walked into my restaurant, Savannah was drowning in rain. He couldn't have been older than 14, soaked hoodie, trembling hands, eyes too tired for someone so young. He didn't ask for money, he asked for work. "I can wash dishes," he said softly. "My mom's sick. We just need one more week at the motel." Something about his face unsettled me. Then I asked his mother's name. Rachel Bennett. I nearly dropped the coffee pot in my hand. Because 20 years earlier, my son Michael swore that woman had betrayed him, before disappearing forever, and judging by that boy's age, Michael had been lying to me for a very long time. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed the way you saw someone you loved, tell me in the comments. And before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. My name is Chelsea Richardson, and for 32 years, Richardson's Grill has sat on the corner of Abercorn Street like an aging lighthouse refusing to go dark. People in Savannah say my restaurant smells like safety. Butter rolls fresh from the oven. Fried chicken crackling in cast-iron skillets. Cinnamon pecan pie cooling beside the register. On Sundays, church families line up outside the door before noon. On lonely weekdays, widowers sit in the same booths drinking coffee for hours because nobody rushes them out. I built this place with my husband Thomas, when we were young and too stubborn to understand how hard life could become. After he died from a heart attack 16 years ago, everyone assumed I would sell the restaurant. Instead, I worked harder. Maybe because grief needs somewhere to go. Some people cry, some people disappear. I learned how to survive by feeding other people. That rainy night after the homeless boy told me his mother's name, I couldn't focus on anything else. Even after he returned to scrubbing dishes in the kitchen, my hands shook every time I reached for a plate. Rachel Bennett. I hadn't heard that name in almost 15 years. Not since Michael looked me in the eyes and told me she had ruined his life. Back then, Michael was 27 and fresh out of law school. Handsome, ambitious, charming enough to make strangers trust him within minutes. He had always been the kind of boy mothers bragged about without realizing it annoyed everyone around them. And Lord help me. I bragged constantly. My Michael made straight A's. My Michael never got into trouble. My Michael was going to change the world. After Thomas died, Michael became my entire heart walking around outside my body. That's what made remembering Rachel hurt so much. Because before Michael became polished and successful, before the expensive suits and television interviews and country club dinners in Atlanta, there had been a different version of him. A softer one. Rachel Bennett was part of that version. I still remember the first night he brought her home. She wore a yellow sundress and looked terrified to meet me. Michael couldn't stop touching her shoulder or smiling at her like she was sunlight after a storm. "Mom," he'd said proudly, "this is Rachel." And I remembered thinking, oh no, my son is truly in love. For 2 years, she practically lived at our house. Rachel helped me close the restaurant at night. She learned how Thomas liked the books organized. She remembered birthdays. She sat beside me in church. One Christmas, she spent an entire weekend helping me bake pies because my arthritis had gotten bad that winter. She never acted entitled, never acted fake. That girl loved my son with everything she had. Then suddenly she vanished. Michael came home furious one evening, throwing clothes into boxes like the world had betrayed him. She lied to me he'd snapped. What happened, I'd asked. "She's gone, Mom. Gone where I don't care." But he did care. I could see it in the way he stopped sleeping, the way he drank too much coffee and stared at nothing during dinner, the way he avoided Savannah for months afterward. Whenever I tried bringing Rachel up, he shut down completely, eventually. He told me she had chosen a different life and used him until something better came along. I hated hearing that. Not because I doubted him, because I believed him. And now, standing inside my restaurant kitchen while rain battered the windows, I suddenly wondered if I had spent 15 years believing the wrong person. I looked toward the back sink. The boy Ethan was rolling up his sleeves while spraying dishes carefully, methodically, almost professionally. Most teenagers would have complained by now. Most would have asked for cash up front or tried sneaking food into their pockets. Not him. Every few minutes he glanced toward the front door nervously, like he expected someone dangerous to walk in. There was something heartbreaking about a child carrying that kind of tension. I poured coffee into a paper cup and walked into the kitchen. "You hungry again?" I asked. He immediately shook his head. "No, ma'am." But his eyes flickered toward the pie display for half a second. That was enough for me. I cut a thick slice of pecan pie and slid it across the counter. "You're too skinny," I said. "I already ate, and I already decided you're eating again." For the first time all evening, a tiny smile appeared on his face. It hit me so suddenly that I had to grip the counter. That smile. My stomach tightened. Michael used to smile exactly like that when he was nervous as a boy. One side of his mouth lifting slightly higher than the other. No. I told myself not to be ridiculous. Lots of people smiled like that. Still, I couldn't stop staring. Ethan noticed and looked uncomfortable. Did I do something wrong? No, I said too quickly. No, sweetheart. Sweetheart. The word slipped out before I could stop it. He lowered his eyes again and quietly ate pie like it might disappear if he moved too fast. I watched his hands. Left-handed, Michael was left-handed too. A strange chill moved through me. Outside, thunder rattled the windows. How old are you? I asked carefully. 14. 14. My chest felt tight. The timeline fit too perfectly. I hated myself for even thinking it. Michael wouldn't abandon his child, would he? No. No, he couldn't. I had not raised a man capable of that. But another voice whispered something far more frightening. Maybe you didn't know your son as well as you thought. Ethan finished eating and immediately stood to wash his plate. You don't have to do that, I said. Yes, ma'am, I do. Again, that same respectful tone Michael used as a little boy whenever he knew he'd done something wrong. I turned away before he could see my face changing. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of ghosts. I walked toward the office and opened the old photo drawer near my desk. My fingers trembled as I searched through fading pictures until I found one from Michael's college graduation. Rachel stood beside him in a blue dress, smiling up at him with absolute trust. I stared at her face for a long time. Then I looked back toward the kitchen, toward Ethan. Same dark eyes, same stubborn chin, same expression Michael wore whenever he tried hiding pain. A terrible feeling settled into my chest, and for the first time in 15 years, I asked myself a question I never thought I would ask. What if Rachel Bennett never betrayed my son? What if my son betrayed her? The rain still hadn't stopped by closing time. Water streamed down the restaurant windows in thick, crooked lines, blurring the streetlights outside Savannah into soft gold smears. Most nights I loved the sound of rain after customers left. It made the restaurant feel alive somehow, safe. Like the world outside couldn't touch me in there. But that night, every thunderclap made my nerves tighten. Ethan stood quietly beside the industrial sink, drying the last stack of plates. I noticed he handled every dish carefully, almost respectfully, like he understood what it meant to own things you couldn't afford to replace. Teenagers usually rush through cleanup jobs, not him. He moved with the caution of someone used to consequences. I wiped down the counter while secretly watching him. The resemblance to Michael kept hitting me in strange little ways. Not enough for certainty. Enough for fear. You don't have to stay this late, I finally said. You already worked more than I asked. He shrugged lightly. It's okay. You've got school tomorrow. A pause. Not right now. I looked up immediately. What does that mean? His shoulders stiffened. We move around a lot. There it was again, that carefulness. Every answer trimmed down to the smallest possible shape, like he'd learned talking too much could become dangerous. I dried my hands slowly. How long since you've been in school? A few months. A few months, I repeated softly. He looked embarrassed now. My mom kept trying, he said quickly. It's just hard when you don't stay in one place long. Something inside me twisted painfully. Children shouldn't know how to survive motel life. They shouldn't know how to dodge questions about addresses or pretend instability is normal. I walked over to the coffee machine and poured him another cup of hot chocolate. You don't have to explain everything to me tonight, I said gently. He accepted the mug with both hands. Thank you. Again, too polite. Too careful. I remembered Michael at 8 years old thanking waitresses for refilling his soda because Thomas had drilled manners into him like military training. A terrible thought crossed my mind before I could stop it. What if Ethan had inherited more from Michael than his face? I pushed the idea away immediately. No, I needed facts, not imagination. Outside lightning flashed across the windows. Ethan flinched slightly. That tiny reaction told me more than his words had all evening. This child had spent too much time afraid. You and your mom safe where you're staying? I asked. Mostly. God help me. I leaned against the counter. Ethan, is someone hurting you? His eyes widened instantly. No, ma'am. Too fast, too automatic. The kind of answer people give when they're used to surviving by denying things. Before I could ask more, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie. I almost forgot, he said quietly. I found this while unloading trash outside. He placed something on the counter between us, A silver lighter, old, scratched, familiar. My breath caught so hard it hurt. The Richardson grill logo was engraved into the metal. My knees nearly gave out. Years ago, when Michael graduated law school, Thomas had ordered 2 custom lighters with the restaurant logo engraved on them. One for himself, one for Michael. After Thomas died, Michael carried that lighter everywhere. I picked it up with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. Ethan frowned nervously. My mom had it. The room went silent except for rain hammering the roof. My pulse started pounding in my ears. "She gave it to you?" "She keeps a box of old stuff." He shrugged. "I took it because I thought maybe I could sell it if we got desperate." "Sell it?" I closed my eyes briefly. Michael's lighter had somehow ended up in Rachel Bennett's possession. No more coincidence. No more denial. The air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "Ethan," I said carefully, "does your mother ever talk about your father?" His expression changed immediately. Walls. Instant walls. "Not really. Do you know him?" "No." "Have you ever met him?" His fingers tightened around the hot chocolate cup. "Once." My heart stopped. "Once." I tried keeping my voice steady. "What happened?" "He left." The simplicity of the answer nearly destroyed me. No anger, no drama. Just resignation, like abandonment had become an ordinary fact of life. "How old were you?" "I think 9. "You think?" We moved around a lot after that. Again with that sentence. Moved around a lot. The kind of phrase adults use to soften homelessness for children. I stared at the lighter in my hand. Michael's lighter, Thomas's restaurant logo. Rachel's son, 14 years old, left-handed. Same smile, same eyes. Dear God, I suddenly needed air. "I'm gonna lock the front doors," I said quickly. I walked into the empty dining room before he could answer. The restaurant looked strange after midnight. Chairs upside down on tables. Dim yellow lights reflecting against polished floors. The smell of coffee and fried onions still lingering in the air. This place had held my entire life. Birthday parties, funerals after church, anniversary dinners, Michael doing homework in corner booths, while Thomas flipped burgers in the kitchen. I remembered Rachel sitting beside Michael at booth 7 laughing so hard, milkshake nearly came out her nose. They'd looked happy. Real happy. Not polished social media happy. Young and foolish and deeply in love. So what happened? I locked the front door slowly while memories kept crashing through my head. Michael crying after Thomas died. Michael promising he'd always take care of me. Michael saying Rachel betrayed him. Michael refusing to explain details. Michael suddenly moving to Atlanta. Michael marrying Vanessa barely 2 years later. I'd accepted every explanation because mothers want to believe their children are good people, especially widowed mothers, especially mothers whose entire world became one child. Behind me, I heard Ethan quietly stacking chairs without being asked. I turned around. The sight nearly broke me. That boy looked like he belonged there. Like some invisible piece of my family had wandered home without realizing it. I walked back toward him slowly. "You shouldn't be out this late in weather like this," I said. "We'll be okay. My mom's waiting." "At the motel?" He nodded. "How far?" "About 20 minutes walking." Walking. In that storm. At midnight. With a sick mother waiting in some cheap motel room. "Absolutely not." "You're not walking tonight," I said firmly. His face immediately filled with panic. "I can't afford a cab. I didn't ask if you could. I can pay you back. You're 14. I still pay my debts." That sentence hit me harder than almost anything else. Children should not talk like exhausted grown men. I grabbed my purse from the office. "I'm driving you." "No, ma'am, really, Ethan." He froze. I softened my voice. "Please." For a second, I thought he might argue again. Instead, he lowered his eyes and nodded quietly. "Okay." As we walked toward the back exit together, thunder shook the building again, and somewhere deep inside me, a terrifying certainty began taking shape. I wasn't just helping a homeless boy anymore. I was driving toward the secret that could destroy everything I believed about my son. The motel sat on the edge of Savannah near the interstate, hidden behind a gas station and a shuttered pawn shop. I hadn't been there in years. Places like that always made me sad because they weren't built for living. They were built for surviving one more night. Rain hammered the windshield as Ethan directed me into the cracked parking lot. Half the neon sign had burned out, leaving only the word VAC NCY glowing weakly through the storm. I turned off the engine slowly. "You live here?" I asked quietly. Ethan nodded without looking at me. The shame in that small movement broke my heart. Children should never feel embarrassed for being poor. But America has a way of teaching people humiliation before they're old enough to spell the word. Ethan reached for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride." "Wait." He paused. I stared at the motel building. Paint peeling off railings. Cigarette burns along the walkway. Curtains hanging crooked inside dim windows. My chest tightened painfully. Rachel Bennett was living here. The same Rachel who used to bring homemade banana pudding to church dinners because she worried store-bought desserts looked lazy. The same girl who once stayed up all night sewing extra curtains for my restaurant after a pipe burst. No. Something had gone terribly wrong. "I'm coming up with you," I said. Ethan immediately stiffened. "You don't have to. I know. My mom's tired. I won't stay long." He hesitated long enough for me to realize he was scared. Not of me? Of what might happen when Rachel saw me. That realization alone told me more than words could. Finally, he nodded. We climbed the narrow outdoor staircase while rainwater dripped through rusted railings. Ethan stopped in front of room 214 and knocked softly. "It's me," he called. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard coughing, deep, violent. The kind of cough that comes from exhaustion living too long inside the body. Locks clicked. The door opened halfway. And there she was. Rachel Bennett looked 20 years older than she should have. Her face had become painfully thin. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her blonde hair, once bright and full, was tied back carelessly, streaked with dull exhaustion. She wore an oversized gray sweatshirt that hung loosely from her shoulders. But despite all that, I recognized her instantly. And judging by the horror on her face, she recognized me too. For one frozen second, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel went pale. "Oh my God," her voice cracked. "Chelsea." "Not Mrs. Richardson, not ma'am." "Chelsea." Like no time had passed at all. "Rachel," I whispered. She looked terrified. Actually terrified. Her eyes darted toward Ethan immediately. "What happened?" she asked him quickly. "Did something go wrong?" "No, Mom," Ethan said. "She helped me." Rachel stared at me like she didn't understand the sentence. Then suddenly she grabbed the edge of the door harder. "You need to leave." The word stunned me. "What?" "You can't be here. Rachel, please." Panic rose in her voice. "Please don't do this tonight. Do this." I frowned in confusion. "I don't understand." Her breathing became uneven. Ethan looked between us nervously. "Mom?" Rachel shut her eyes briefly like she was trying not to fall apart. Then she looked at me again. Older women recognize certain emotions quickly because we've lived long enough to see them before. Fear, shame, humiliation. Rachel wasn't angry to see me. She was afraid of me. And I suddenly realized something deeply wrong had happened years ago. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said softly. Rachel gave a short, broken laugh. "That's not what Michael said." The hallway went silent except for rain pounding the roof. My stomach dropped. "What did Michael say?" Rachel stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, she opened the motel door wider. The room inside was painfully small. One bed, one lamp, a tiny table covered in prescription bottles, microwave noodles stacked near the television, a damp smell lingering in the air. This wasn't living. This was desperation stretched paper thin. Rachel sat carefully on the edge of the bed while another coughing fit shook through her body. Instinctively, I moved closer. "You need a doctor." "I need rent money," she replied weakly. God. I looked away for a second because suddenly my eyes burned. Ethan quietly grabbed towels from the bathroom to dry rainwater off the floor. He moved around the room like this routine was normal, like motel survival had become home. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "A few weeks." And before that, Rachel smiled bitterly. "Other motels." I sat down slowly in the only chair. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, I asked the question sitting like a stone inside my chest. "Rachel, why did you disappear?" She looked genuinely shocked. "Disappear? Michael said you left him." For several seconds, she simply stared at me. Then something inside her seemed to collapse. "Oh my God," she whispered. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Oh my God. You really don't know." My pulse quickened. "Know what?" Rachel covered her mouth with shaking fingers. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she looked exhausted, like a woman too tired to carry old pain anymore. "Michael told me you hated me," she said quietly. I blinked. "What?" He said your family would never accept me after I got pregnant. The room tilted slightly. Pregnant. Even though I already suspected it, hearing the word aloud still hit like a physical blow. Ethan froze near the bathroom door. Rachel noticed too late. Her face crumpled immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered to him. But Ethan didn't look shocked. He looked sad. Like he'd always known this conversation would happen eventually. I stared at Rachel. "You were pregnant when you left Savannah. I didn't leave willingly." "What does that mean?" Rachel swallowed hard. "Michael came to my apartment one night after graduation. He said his career was taking off in Atlanta. He said a baby would destroy everything he worked for. Every heartbeat in my chest became painful. "No," I whispered automatically. Rachel laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "That's exactly what I said." I shook my head slowly. "My son wouldn't." "He begged me to disappear, Chelsea." The use of my first name hurt this time, because it sounded familiar. Intimate, like family. "He said your family deserved better than scandal. Better than a waitress from the wrong side of town with a baby." I felt sick. "That's not true." "I know that now," Rachel whispered. "But back then, I was 24 and terrified." Tears rolled down her face quietly. "I loved him so much." Ethan lowered his eyes. "No child should hear their mother speak heartbreak like that." "What about the letters?" I asked suddenly. "Why didn't you ever contact me?" Rachel looked confused. I did. A cold chill spread through my body. "What?" "I wrote to you 3 times. "No. No, no, no." "She said she never got them," Ethan murmured softly. Rachel nodded weakly. "Michael told me you read the letters and wanted nothing to do with us." I stopped breathing for a second. "What? He brought me a letter with your signature." Rachel's voice cracked. "It said if I contacted your family again, you'd make sure I regretted it." The motel room disappeared around me. Everything narrowed into roaring silence. I had never written such a thing. Never. Rachel looked at me carefully now, and slowly, painfully, realization spread across her face too. "You really didn't know," she whispered. I couldn't answer. Because in that moment, for the first time in my life, I became afraid of what my son might truly be capable of. I barely remember driving home that night. Rain blurred the roads, streetlights stretched across the windshield like melting gold ribbons, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Michael lied to me. The sentence kept repeating inside my head like a church bell I couldn't silence. Not a small lie, not a harmless omission, a life-destroying lie. Every memory I had trusted suddenly felt unstable. I pulled into my driveway sometime after 1 a.m. and sat inside the car without moving. My house looked exactly the same as it always had. White shutters, small porch swing, warm kitchen light I'd forgotten to turn off earlier. Normal. Meanwhile, my entire world no longer was. I finally forced myself inside. The silence felt enormous. Thomas's old recliner sat beside the fireplace exactly where he used to leave it. His framed photograph still rested on the mantel. Some nights I talked to that picture when loneliness got too heavy. That night I stared at it and whispered, "What did we miss?" Because parents always think they know the hearts they raised. But maybe we only know the version our children allow us to see. I didn't sleep. Around 4 a.m, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching darkness slowly fade outside the windows. Michael as a little boy kept flashing through my mind. Michael crying when he found a dead bird in the yard. Michael saving stray cats. Michael hugging me after Thomas died and promising I'll always take care of you, Mom. How does a child like that become a man who abandons his pregnant girlfriend? How does someone learn to erase people they once loved? By sunrise, I realized something terrifying. I needed to hear Michael say it himself. So at 8:30 that morning, I called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom." His voice sounded distracted, polished, expensive. I could practically hear his office behind him. "Are you busy?" I asked. "I've got court in an hour." "Everything okay?" "No." Nothing was okay. But suddenly I understood why Rachel had stayed silent all these years. Because how do you begin telling someone their child destroyed another human being? "I need to ask you something," I said carefully. A pause. "What's wrong?" I met Rachel Bennett. Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence. Then finally one word. Sharp, controlled, dangerously controlled. At the restaurant. Another pause. Why she didn't come looking for me? Michael. I heard him exhale slowly. Mom, listen carefully to me. That woman is manipulative. The coldness in his voice chilled me. She's sick, I said quietly. She's always had problems. She's living in a motel. That's not my responsibility. The cruelty of that sentence stunned me so badly I forgot to speak, because no decent man says those words about the mother of his child, especially not like that, not with irritation, not with indifference. Michael, I whispered, is Ethan your son? Complete silence. Long enough for truth to answer before he did. Then, finally, no, too fast, too rehearsed. A lawyer's denial, not a son speaking honestly to his mother. Look at me and say that I said softly. I'm on the phone. Exactly. His tone hardened immediately. Mom, you don't know what Rachel told you. Then tell me your version. I already did years ago. No, I replied quietly. You gave me pieces. I heard movement on his end. A door closing. Lower voice now, more careful. Rachel got pregnant at a very complicated time in my life. My chest tightened. Complicated. That was the word he chose. Not tragic, not painful. Complicated. She told me you knew. She trapped me. I closed my eyes instantly. There it was. The oldest coward's excuse in America, Michael continued before I could speak. You don't understand how ambitious she was. Ambitious, I repeated in disbelief. Michael, she's living in a motel. She made choices. You made choices too. The line went quiet again. I realized then that Michael wasn't shocked I'd discovered Ethan. He was angry. Angry because the secret had resurfaced. That frightened me more than anything else. Did you forge a letter pretending to be me? I asked suddenly. The silence this time was different, heavier, and in that silence I got my answer. Mom. Oh my God, please listen. You told her I hated her. It was complicated. There's that word again. I stood from the kitchen table so fast, the chair scraped loudly against the floor. She thought I wanted her gone. I was trying to protect my future. There it was. Finally. Raw. Ugly. Honest. Protect my future. I pressed my hand against the counter because suddenly I felt dizzy. Your future, I repeated slowly. You have no idea what things were like back then. Then explain it to me. I had opportunities, Mom. Big ones. Important people watching me. Rachel showing up pregnant would have destroyed everything. Destroyed everything. Not changed things. Not made life difficult. Destroyed everything. Because to Michael, success had become something sacred enough to sacrifice human beings for. My voice trembled. So you abandoned her. I sent money. I laughed in disbelief. A horrible laugh, like my body no longer knew what emotion belonged where. You sent money. I tried to help quietly. She raised your son alone. I don't know that he's mine. The lie sounded weak even to him. I could hear it. He knew I no longer believed him. Michael, I said softly, I saw your face standing in that kitchen last night. Mom, I saw Thomas's face too. That finally silenced him, because Michael loved his father more than anyone. And suddenly I realized something else. Michael had spent years building a version of himself his father would have hated. I need you to stay away from them, he said quietly. The request stunned me. What Rachel knows how to manipulate emotions? She's dying. That's not your problem. I almost dropped the phone. Not your problem. My son had just called a dying woman and a homeless child not my problem, and for the first time in 42 years, I didn't recognize the voice speaking to me. Are you hearing yourself right now? I whispered. You're emotional because you feel guilty. Guilty. Yes. Because you always liked Rachel more than me. The accusation hit like a slap. What you always took her side. I defended you for 15 years. He ignored that. She's turning you against me. No. No, Rachel didn't do that. The truth did. And maybe somewhere deep inside himself, Michael already knew it. I took a slow breath. Did you ever meet Ethan? Another pause. Then, once. My heart broke completely, because Ethan had told me the same thing. Once. Not never. Once. Why, I asked. He contacted me when he was 9. He contacted you. Rachel needed money. So you met your son. He's not stopped lying to me. My voice cracked sharply enough to surprise both of us. Silence. Then Michael said something that made my blood run cold. If you keep involving yourself in this, people could get hurt. I froze. Not shouted, not emotional. Calm. Controlled. A warning. And suddenly Rachel's fear made perfect sense. I spoke very quietly. Was that a threat? No. It's reality. The line disconnected. I stood motionless in my kitchen, holding the dead phone while morning sunlight slowly crept across the floor. For a long time, I simply stared ahead. Then I looked toward Thomas's photograph again, and deep in my bones, I understood something heartbreaking. The boy I raised was gone, and whatever remained in his place was willing to destroy anyone who threatened the life he built on lies. After my call with Michael, I stopped trusting my own memories. That was the hardest part. Not the lies themselves. The realization that I had spent years helping bury them without knowing it. All day at the restaurant, I moved through routines automatically. Refilled coffee, smiled at customers, took orders, nodded at conversations I barely heard. But inside my head, everything kept replaying. She trapped me. I was protecting my future. Stay away from them. Every sentence sounded colder the second time I remembered it. By lunchtime, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed proof. Not suspicions, not emotions. Proof. So after the afternoon rush ended, I locked myself inside the small office behind the kitchen and pulled out the old storage keys. The storage room sat beneath the restaurant near the freezer inventory. Thomas used to joke that I kept enough old paperwork down there to survive a government audit after the apocalypse. Maybe he was right. Dust coated the shelves. Old invoices leaned sideways in collapsing boxes. Christmas decorations from 20 years ago sat stacked beside faded menus and broken picture frames. I switched on the dim overhead bulb and started searching. At first, I wasn't even sure what I hoped to find. Maybe old letters, maybe photographs, maybe something proving Rachel had lied after all. God forgive me, part of me still wanted my son innocent, even after everything. That's motherhood for you. Love keeps searching for excuses long after truth arrives. I spent nearly an hour opening boxes before I found one marked Michael College. My hands trembled instantly. Inside were old report cards, debate trophies, graduation programs, photographs, and letters. Dozens of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. I sat down hard on the floor. Rachel's handwriting, I recognized it immediately. Neat loops, careful penmanship. The top envelope was unopened. My name written across the front. Chelsea Richardson. My chest tightened painfully. I turned the envelope over. No stamp damage, no tear marks. Nobody had opened it, meaning it never reached me. I slowly untied the ribbon. There were 4 letters total. All addressed to me, all unopened, and every single one dated within months after Rachel disappeared. Oh my God, I whispered. My fingers shook so badly I struggled opening the first envelope. Inside was a letter folded carefully into thirds. Chelsea, I know you probably never want to hear from me again, but I need you to know I never wanted to hurt your family. I love Michael more than I know how to explain. I'm scared and I don't know what to do anymore. I stopped reading. Tears blurred the words instantly, because this wasn't the writing of a manipulative woman chasing money. This was a terrified girl begging not to be erased. I forced myself to continue. Michael said you're ashamed of me for getting pregnant. He said your family would never accept a child born into scandal. I tried to believe he was only angry, but after your letter, I understand now. Your letter. My pulse quickened. I dropped the pages and searched frantically through the box again until I found another envelope. This one already opened, no postage, just my name. Inside sat a single typed page. Rachel, do not contact my family again. Michael has a future ahead of him, and you are no longer part of it. Whatever mistakes were made between you two must remain private for everyone's sake. If you truly care about him, you will disappear quietly and move on with your life. Chelsea Richardson. My vision blurred completely, because that wasn't my writing, not my words, not my voice. And yet, at the bottom sat my signature, perfectly copied. I stared at it in horror. Michael forged my signature, my own son. The storage room suddenly felt freezing cold. I remembered Rachel's face in that motel room. The fear, the humiliation, the certainty that I hated her. Dear God, she spent 15 years believing I rejected her and her child, and I never even knew they existed. I pressed my hand over my mouth because a sob almost escaped me. Then another thought hit. How did these letters end up hidden in Michael's college box, unless he intercepted them himself? I closed my eyes. Piece by piece, the truth was assembling itself into something monstrous. Michael hadn't just abandoned Rachel. He isolated her, controlled the narrative, buried evidence, manipulated both of us. I suddenly remembered something from years ago that I hadn't thought about in forever. One afternoon, shortly after Rachel disappeared, I'd asked Michael whether she ever came by the restaurant looking for him. He'd answered too quickly. No, and if she does, don't let her in. At the time, I thought he was heartbroken. Now I realized he was afraid the truth might reach me. I kept digging through the box. Near the bottom sat a small bank envelope. Inside were copies of cashier's checks. $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, all issued to Rachel Bennett. My stomach turned. Hush money. Not support, not responsibility, payments to disappear. One check memo line made my blood run cold for relocation. Relocation? Like she was a problem to move somewhere else. I leaned back against the wall, shaking. I had raised this man, fed him, protected him, loved him more than my own life. And somehow, somewhere, ambition had hollowed out something essential inside him. A sudden noise upstairs startled me. Voices. Customers arriving early for dinner service. I quickly wiped my face and gathered the letters back into the box. But before closing it, I noticed one final envelope hidden underneath the others. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Rachel. My pulse quickened again. I opened it carefully. Inside sat a folded note written entirely in Michael's handwriting. Rachel, this is the only way forward. My career cannot survive this. Vanessa's family cannot know, if you care about me at all. You'll take the money and leave Georgia before anyone finds out. You promised you loved me enough to sacrifice for my future. Now prove it. I felt physically ill. Vanessa. So that was it. Not just ambition, status, money, connections. Michael had chosen the wealthy family over the poor pregnant woman who loved him, and somehow that hurt even more than abandonment itself, because it was deliberate, calculated. Not panic, not youth, a decision. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then another memory surfaced suddenly, the speed of Michael's engagement. At the time, everyone thought it was romantic. He met Vanessa at a charity fundraiser in Atlanta and proposed less than a year later. Too fast. Much too fast, especially for a man supposedly devastated by heartbreak. Unless Rachel had never been the heartbreak. Unless she'd been the obstacle. My chest tightened so painfully I had to sit down again. I thought about Ethan carrying dishes carefully in my kitchen. About his polite voice, his tired eyes. That boy had spent 14 years paying for decisions made before he was even born. And Rachel? Rachel had carried all that shame alone because she believed I wanted her gone. I looked down at Michael's letter again, then at my forged signature beneath the fake rejection letter, and something inside me changed permanently until then. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation waiting to soften this. Some misunderstanding, some missing detail, but there it was in black ink. Cold, clear, intentional. My son destroyed 2 lives to protect his reputation, and the most heartbreaking part of all, I wasn't sure he regretted it. I didn't go home after finding the letters. I couldn't. The walls of the restaurant suddenly felt haunted by everything I had failed to see. So instead, I drove back to the motel. Part of me worried Rachel would refuse to open the door again. After all, I now represented years of pain she'd never deserved. But when Ethan opened room 214 and saw me standing there with grocery bags in both hands, his entire expression changed. Relief, pure relief. That alone nearly broke my heart. "Mom's asleep," he whispered. "That's okay." He stepped aside carefully. The motel room looked even smaller during daylight. Harsh afternoon sun exposed every crack in the walls, every stain in the carpet, every desperate attempt to survive with dignity. Rachel slept curled beneath a thin blanket, coughing softly in her sleep. Prescription bottles covered the bedside table beside unopened medical bills. I set the groceries down quietly: milk, soup, fruit, medicine. Simple things nobody should have to beg life for. Ethan stared at the bags like I'd brought gold. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." His eyes lowered immediately, uncomfortable with kindness. Another sign of a hard life. Children who grow up loved expect help naturally. Children who grow up struggling apologize for existing. I unpacked groceries while Ethan carefully organized them into the tiny motel refrigerator. "You're good at taking care of things," I said softly. He shrugged. "We lose stuff if we're messy." The sentence hit harder than he intended. I turned toward him fully. "How long have things been this bad?" He hesitated. "A while." "That's not an answer." His expression tightened slightly. I realized then that Ethan protected Rachel the way adults usually protect children, not the other way around. "She tries really hard," he said quietly. I know she does. She never wanted me asking people for help. You asked for work, not help. That's different. I smiled faintly despite the sadness crushing my chest. Michael used to say the exact same thing. At 16, he worked summer shifts at the marina because he refused to take allowance money after Thomas lost income one difficult year. I want to earn it, he'd insisted proudly. The memory felt painful now, like touching broken glass. Ethan finished putting groceries away and glanced nervously toward his sleeping mother. You shouldn't tell her I asked for work. Why she gets upset? Because she's worried about you. He nodded. Then, after a pause, he quietly added, she thinks people judge us. I looked around the motel room again. People did judge them. America judges poverty constantly while pretending not to. I sat carefully in the old chair beside the bed. Ethan, can I ask you something? His shoulders tensed immediately. You don't have to answer if you don't want. Okay. I chose my words carefully. When you met Michael, what happened? The silence stretched long enough to hear traffic outside. Finally, Ethan spoke. He didn't know who I was at first. My chest tightened. How old were you? 9, I think. Same answer as before. Children who grow up unstable often remember years by fear instead of birthdays. How did you find him? My mom got really sick one winter. Ethan stared down at his hands. I found his name in an old box, the lighter, the photos, the hidden pieces of a life Rachel tried protecting. I emailed his office, Ethan continued softly. I didn't tell Mom. My stomach twisted. A 9-year-old child secretly searching for his father. Dear God. What happened after that? He called me. Emotion flickered across Ethan's face too quickly to fully hide. Hope. Old hope. The dangerous kind children carry before adults destroy it. He sounded nice on the phone, Ethan admitted quietly. At first. I braced myself. He met me at a diner outside Atlanta. What did he say? Ethan swallowed hard. He asked if Mom sent me. The pain in that sentence sat heavily between us. And I said no. Did he believe you? I don't know. His voice had become flat now. Detached. The way people speak when discussing memories that still hurt too much. He bought me pancakes, Ethan said. Then he asked questions about Mom for a long time. I closed my eyes briefly, of course. Not concern. Damage control. Did he ask about you? Ethan gave a tiny shrug. A little. Something inside me cracked further. A father meeting his son after 9 years. And asking a little. What happened after he gave me money? The shame in his voice was unbearable. I didn't want to take it, he added quickly. But Mom needed medicine. You don't have to explain that to me. He said not to contact him again. The room went silent. Even though I already knew Michael abandoned him, hearing the details felt different, worse, crueler. Because children remember rejection forever, no matter how quietly adults deliver it. Ethan stared toward the motel window. I kept thinking maybe he'd change his mind. Oh, God. I looked away because tears filled my eyes instantly. He didn't, Ethan shook his head once. No. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, almost embarrassed, he asked, was he always like that? The question shattered me completely. Because Ethan didn't know Michael before ambition consumed him. Didn't know the boy who loved baseball and old blues music and cried when dogs got hurt in movies. So, I answered honestly. No, I whispered. Ethan nodded slowly, like that somehow hurt more. Rachel stirred weakly on the bed, then started coughing violently. Ethan moved instantly beside her, not frightened, practiced. He handed her water before she even opened her eyes. Children should not know illness that intimately. Rachel finally looked up and saw me sitting there. For 1 second, panic crossed her face again. Then she'd noticed the groceries. And Ethan standing close beside me. Something softer replaced the fear. You came back, she whispered. I nodded. Rachel looked exhausted beyond words. I'm sorry you saw this place, she said quietly. I almost laughed from heartbreak, even now. She was embarrassed instead of angry. Rachel, I said carefully, you have nothing to apologize for. Tears filled her eyes immediately. She turned away quickly, ashamed of crying. That destroyed me more than the tears themselves. Because women like Rachel spend years apologizing for surviving. I reached into my purse slowly. I found your letters. Her entire body froze. What? The ones you wrote me. Color drained from her face. He kept them, she whispered. I nodded once. Rachel shut her eyes like the confirmation physically hurt. For several seconds she said nothing. Then finally, I thought you hated me. The rawness in her voice nearly made me cry again. I never even saw them. Rachel pressed trembling fingers against her mouth. Ethan looked between us silently. Then, very softly, he asked the question sitting underneath everything. So, you didn't know about me? I turned toward him fully. No, sweetheart, I whispered. I swear to you, I didn't. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatic, not emotional, just relief. Like one tiny piece of weight finally slipped off his shoulders, and in that moment, watching that boy try so hard not to cry, I stopped seeing him as Michael's secret. I started seeing him as my grandson. 3 days later, I drove to Atlanta to meet Harold Green. The closer I got to the city, the heavier my chest became. Atlanta had changed Michael, or maybe it had simply revealed who he already was, underneath ambition and polished charm. Tall glass buildings stretched across the skyline as I exited the highway. Everything looked expensive, controlled, powerful. Michael loved that world. Savannah had warmth, Atlanta had status, and somewhere along the way my son started worshiping one more than the other. Harold Green's law office sat inside an old brick building near Peachtree Street. Unlike Michael's sleek corporate firm, Harold's office still smelled like paper files and coffee brewed too strong. Harold had been Thomas's closest friend for over 40 years. He'd also been Michael's mentor once, back when Michael still smiled honestly. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mrs. Richardson, she said gently, Mr. Green's expecting you. That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. Expecting me. Meaning Harold already knew why I came. He stood when I entered his office. Older now, thinner, white hair instead of gray, but his eyes carried the same kindness they always had. Chelsea. I tried smiling. Failed. Harold closed the office door quietly. Then he looked at me for a long moment before saying the words I dreaded most. So you finally found out. My knees nearly gave out. I sat down slowly. You knew, Harold sighed heavily and removed his glasses. I knew pieces. Why didn't you tell me? Pain crossed his face instantly. Because Michael begged me not to. I stared at him in disbelief. Harold leaned back in his chair, slowly, looking suddenly exhausted. You have to understand. After Thomas died, Michael wasn't handling things well. Anger flared inside me, so abandoning Rachel was grief. No, Harold said firmly. It was fear. Fear. That word again? I folded my arms tightly. Then explain it to me. Harold stayed silent for several seconds before finally speaking. Michael came to me 14 years ago asking for legal advice. My pulse quickened. He told me Rachel was pregnant. He said the timing would destroy everything. Destroy what his future. I laughed bitterly. Everybody keeps saying that like it justifies something. It doesn't, Harold replied quietly. The sadness in his voice startled me. This wasn't a man defending Michael. This was a man ashamed of him. He'd just started building relationships with Vanessa's family. Harold continued, You know how wealthy they are? Yes. I knew. Vanessa's father practically owned half of Atlanta real estate. Country clubs, political donations, corporate boards. The kind of family that opens doors ordinary people never even see. Michael marrying Vanessa had changed his entire social standing overnight. Back then, I thought it was luck. Now I wondered how much calculation was involved. Did Vanessa know about Rachel? Harold shook his head slowly. No. And Michael wanted to keep it that way. Yes. The office suddenly felt too warm. I remembered Michael introducing Vanessa at Thanksgiving years ago. Beautiful pearls, designer heels, perfect posture, everything polished to expensive perfection. Rachel used to arrive wearing flour on her jeans from helping me bake pies. Michael had chosen between two futures, and he picked the richer one. The realization made me feel physically sick. Harold opened a desk drawer carefully. There's more. He handed me a thin folder. Inside sat copies of legal documents, money transfers, temporary agreements, confidentiality paperwork. I looked up sharply. What is this? Michael asked me to draft relocation assistance forms. Relocation, I repeated coldly. Harold's expression darkened. I argued with him for hours, Chelsea. I looked back down at the papers. Rachel Bennett agrees to voluntarily relocate outside the state of Georgia in exchange for financial compensation. Compensation. Like she was a lawsuit. Like Ethan was a scandal to bury. He really planned all of this, I whispered. Harold rubbed his forehead tiredly. At first I thought he was panicking, young, stupid. But then what? He became cold about it. That word again. Cold. I remembered Michael's voice on the phone. That's not my responsibility. Harold continued quietly. He kept talking about timing, reputation, opportunity. He said one scandal could cost him everything, and you helped him. The accusation slipped out before I could stop it. Harold accepted it without defensiveness. Yes, he said softly, and I regret it. Silence settled heavily between us. Outside the office window, Atlanta traffic crawled endlessly through the streets below. Finally, I asked the question haunting me most. Did he ever love her? Harold's eyes saddened immediately. Yes. The answer hurt more than I expected. Because if Michael never loved Rachel, this would be simpler somehow. Cruel men are easier to understand when they never cared. But Harold shook his head slowly. He loved her deeply once. Then how does someone do this? Harold looked toward the window. I've practiced law 45 years, Chelsea. You'd be surprised what fear can turn people into when success becomes more important than character. That sentence stayed with me. Success becomes more important than character. I thought about all the times Michael donated money publicly, all the interviews about integrity and leadership, all the charity galas with photographers and speeches. Maybe goodness performed for strangers mattered less than goodness practiced privately. Harold leaned forward carefully. There's something else you need to know. My stomach tightened again. What now? Michael contacted a private investigator last week. Ice spread through my chest. What he's looking into Rachel. Fear moved sharply through me. Why, I don't know. But I did know. Control, damage management, silencing problems, just like before. He wouldn't hurt them, I whispered automatically. Harold's silence terrified me more than words would have. You think he would? I think Michael has spent 14 years convincing himself survival justifies cruelty. My throat tightened painfully. Rachel's sick, Harold. I know. Ethan's just a child. I know. I looked down at the papers again. One document had Michael's signature across the bottom. Strong, confident, final, like he never expected the truth to return. Does Vanessa know any of this? I asked quietly. Harold hesitated. No. Would she stay if she did? He gave me a sad look. That marriage already looks colder than people realize. Something about the way he said it unsettled me. Appearances again. Everything about Michael's life suddenly felt staged, curated, built carefully enough to hide the rot underneath. I stood slowly, gathering the documents. Chelsea, Harold said gently before I reached the door. I turned. His expression softened with genuine grief. This isn't your fault. I almost cried hearing that. Because part of me desperately believed it was. Parents always wonder where they failed when their children become strangers. I managed a weak nod and left the office, but halfway down the hallway I stopped walking. A memory hit me so suddenly it stole my breath. 15 years ago, Michael came home from Atlanta wearing an expensive new suit. I remember teasing him. Well, somebody looks rich already. And Michael smiled. Not warmly, triumphantly. Then he said something I hadn't understood until now. Some people are meant for bigger lives, Mom. At the time, I thought he meant success. Now I realized what he truly meant. Some people mattered more than others, and Rachel Bennett had simply been one of the people he decided to leave behind. Rachel collapsed 2 nights later. I was serving coffee during the dinner rush when Ethan burst through the restaurant doors looking terrified. His face alone made my heart stop. Chelsea, he gasped. She can't breathe. Everything inside me moved before my mind did. I threw my apron onto the counter and grabbed my keys while my waitress, Denise, immediately took over the dining room without asking questions. By the time we reached the motel, Rachel was curled on the bed struggling for air. Her skin looked gray. Each breath sounded wet and painful. Oh my God, I whispered. Ethan stood beside her helplessly, trying not to panic. I told her we should go earlier, he said shakily. She kept saying we couldn't afford it. That sentence alone nearly shattered me. Couldn't afford to breathe. What kind of country forces people to calculate the cost of staying alive? I called 911 immediately. Rachel tried protesting between coughs. No hospital? You are going to the hospital, I said firmly. We can't pay. I don't care. Tears filled her eyes then. Not because she was afraid, because nobody had spoken to her like she mattered in a very long time. The ambulance arrived fast, but those 15 minutes waiting felt endless. Ethan never left Rachel's side once. He held her hand. adjusted her blanket, helped her sit upright when coughing got worse. 14 years old, and already carrying responsibilities some grown men run from. The paramedics finally loaded Rachel onto a stretcher while Ethan climbed silently into the ambulance beside her. I followed behind in my car all the way to Memorial Hospital. Hospitals after midnight always feel strange to me. Too bright, too cold, too full of people pretending not to be afraid. Rachel disappeared behind emergency room doors while Ethan and I sat in the waiting area beneath flickering television news neither of us watched. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, "She hates hospitals." I looked over. "Why, she says hospitals are where poor people find out how expensive dying is." The sentence hit me so hard I had to look away, because Rachel wasn't entirely wrong. Ethan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "She used to work double shifts when I was little," he murmured. "Even when she was sick." I listened carefully. "She'd leave food for me before school, then work all day, then clean offices at night." Something inside me ached deeper with every word. "And Michael?" I asked softly before I could stop myself. Ethan's face closed immediately. "She never talked bad about him." That answer surprised me. "She could have," he added quietly. "I think sometimes she wanted to, but she didn't." "No." I sat back slowly. Rachel protected Michael's image even after everything he'd done. Not for Michael, for Ethan. Because children deserve the right to love their parents, even flawed ones. At least until truth forces that innocence away. A doctor finally approached around 1 a.m, family of Rachel Bennett. Ethan stood instantly. The doctor's expression softened the second he looked at him. "She's stable right now," I exhaled shakily. "But she has severe untreated pneumonia," he continued. "And there may be underlying complications we need to investigate." "Is she gonna die?" Ethan asked bluntly. The honesty of children always hurts more than adult fear. The doctor crouched slightly to his level. "We're going to do everything we can, not yes, not no." I knew enough hospital language to understand that answer. Rachel was sicker than she'd admitted. Much sicker. They finally allowed us into her room an hour later. Rachel looked tiny in the hospital bed. Machines beeped softly around her while oxygen tubing rested beneath her nose. Ethan immediately moved beside her. The relief in Rachel's eyes when she saw him nearly broke me. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded weakly. Then she noticed me standing behind him, and suddenly tears filled her eyes again. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. I frowned. "For what? For dragging you into this mess." That word again. Mess. As if her existence had become something shameful. I walked closer carefully. "Rachel, none of this is your fault." She looked away immediately. People who've carried blame too long stop knowing how to put it down. Ethan quietly stepped outside to get water, giving us privacy without needing to be asked. The moment he disappeared, Rachel began crying silently. Not dramatically, not loudly, just exhausted tears from a woman who had spent years surviving alone. "I tried so hard," she whispered. "I know. I never wanted money from Michael. I know. I only wanted him to love Ethan once." That sentence shattered me completely. Not marriage, not revenge, not luxury. One moment of love for her son, and Michael couldn't even give her that. I sat beside the bed carefully. "Why didn't you ever come back to Savannah?" Rachel laughed weakly through tears. "Because I believed you hated me." God. Every time she said it, guilt crushed me all over again. "I would have helped you," I whispered painfully. "I know that now. You should never have gone through this alone." Rachel stared toward the hospital window for several seconds. Then quietly, I almost came back once. My heart tightened when Ethan was 10. "What happened?" She swallowed hard. "I saw Michael on television, of course." By then, Michael had become successful enough for local interviews and charity boards. He was standing beside Vanessa at some fundraiser. Rachel continued. "They looked perfect. Perfect." That word made me sick now. "He kept smiling at her the same way he used to smile at me," she whispered. I closed my eyes briefly. "And I realized—" Rachel's voice cracked. "I was the only person still carrying the past. No, not the only one. Michael carried it too. He just buried it beneath money and prestige." Rachel wiped her eyes weakly. "Ethan deserves better than this." "Yes, he does. He deserves stability." "Yes. A future." The last word lingered painfully between us. Future. The very thing Michael once destroyed to protect his own. Rachel suddenly looked frightened. "Chelsea, what?" If Michael finds out where we are, he already knows. Fear crossed her face instantly. He threatened you. I hesitated. Rachel understood anyway. Oh, God. He won't touch you, I said firmly. But even as I spoke, I remembered Harold's warning. Private investigators, control, damage management. A terrible feeling settled inside me. Rachel noticed my expression immediately. You're scared of him now too, she whispered. The truth of it stunned me silent. Because yes, some part of me was, not physically, but morally, emotionally. I no longer knew how far Michael would go to protect the life he built. The hospital room fell quiet. Then softly, Rachel said something that stayed with me forever. The saddest part is, I still remember the boy he used to be. Tears burned my eyes instantly, because so did I, and maybe that was what hurt most of all. Not that Michael became cruel, but that once upon a time, he truly wasn't. Rachel stayed in the hospital for 4 days. During those 4 days, something inside me shifted completely. At first, I kept thinking like Michael's mother. By the 4th day, I started thinking like Ethan's grandmother. That difference changed everything. Every morning before opening the restaurant, I stopped by the hospital with breakfast for Ethan. Pancakes one day, biscuits and gravy the next. Fresh fruit when I could convince him to eat something healthy. Every single time he thanked me like I was doing something extraordinary. And every single time it hurt. Children should expect kindness, not be shocked by it. Rachel improved slowly after antibiotics and oxygen treatments, but the doctors still looked concerned whenever they thought she wasn't watching. I noticed those looks. Mothers always do. One rainy afternoon, while Ethan went downstairs to the vending machines, Rachel motioned weakly toward the small duffel bag beside her bed. There's something inside I need you to take. I frowned slightly. What is it? A wooden box? My stomach tightened immediately. Not because of fear. Instinct. The same instinct women get before hearing truths capable of changing lives. I opened the worn duffel carefully and found a small cedar box wrapped inside an old sweater. The edges looked scratched from years of moving, protecting, hiding. Rachel watched me quietly. I almost threw it away 100 times. What is it? Proof. The words settled heavily between us. I carried the box to the chair beside her bed and opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, letters, receipts, and several small cassette tapes. My pulse quickened instantly. What are these? Rachel looked toward the window. Conversations. A cold chill moved through me. Conversations with Michael. She nodded once. I picked up one of the tapes carefully. Tiny handwritten label March 14th. Another after Atlanta. Another. The baby. My hands started trembling. You recorded him. At first, no, Rachel whispered. Then I realized nobody would ever believe me without proof. That sentence alone told me exactly how alone she'd felt. I looked inside the box again. At the bottom sat an old cassette recorder. Still working. Still carrying pieces of the past. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. I haven't listened to them in years. Why keep them? Because part of me kept hoping one day Ethan would ask questions. My chest tightened painfully. And if he did, I wanted him to know I didn't lie to him. Not revenge. Protection. Always protection. I picked up one cassette slowly. Do you want me to hear it? Rachel hesitated, then finally whispered, yes. My hands shook while inserting the tape into the recorder. Static crackled softly, then voices, young voices, Rachel's first, scared, crying. Michael, please don't do this. My heart stopped instantly. Then Michael answered, and even though his voice sounded younger, less polished, it was unmistakably my son. I'm trying to be realistic. Realistic. Even back then, he used cold words to avoid guilt. Rachel's voice trembled through the speaker. You said we'd figure this out together. I said that before things changed. What changed? A long pause. Then Michael sighed impatiently. My future. The room around me disappeared. Because hearing him say it with my own ears was different than letters. Different than accusations. This was real, raw, undeniable. Rachel on the tape sounded heartbroken. I'm carrying your child. I know. Then why are you acting like we're strangers? More static. Then Michael spoke again. You don't understand how important this opportunity is. Vanessa's family, even then, already choosing wealth over love. Rachel's recorded voice cracked into sobs. So what am I supposed to do? Another pause. Then the sentence that shattered something permanently inside me. You said you loved me enough to sacrifice for me. I covered my mouth instantly. Same words from the letter, same manipulation, same selfishness disguised as heartbreak. Rachel looked away while the tape continued. You're asking me to disappear younger, Rachel whispered. No, Michael replied calmly. I'm asking you not to ruin both our lives. Both our lives. Not Ethan's, not hers. His, always his. The tape ended with Rachel crying softly while Michael kept repeating practical things about money and relocation. Practical. God help me. My son discussed abandoning his child like a business transaction. I turned the recorder off slowly. Silence filled the hospital room. Then I realized I was crying, not loudly, quietly. The kind of crying that comes from grief too deep for sound. Rachel watched me carefully. I'm sorry. I looked up immediately. Stop apologizing. She flinched slightly anyway. Years of blame had become instinctive. I wiped my face shakily. How many tapes are there, Seven? Does Ethan know no? Will you tell him Rachel stared down at her blanket for a long time? Then quietly, I don't want him to hate his father. The statement stunned me. After everything, she's still worried about Ethan's heart. Not Michael's reputation. Ethan's heart. I looked toward the hospital doorway where Ethan had disappeared earlier. He already knows enough to hurt, I whispered. Rachel nodded sadly. I know. Then, after a pause, but hearing it himself will change him forever. She was right. Children survive abandonment differently than betrayal. Abandonment still leaves room for fantasy. Maybe Dad was confused, maybe he was scared, maybe he secretly loved me. But hearing your father calmly discuss erasing you before birth, that destroys something deeper. The hospital door suddenly opened. Ethan walked back in, carrying 2 sodas. The moment he saw my face, he stopped. What happened? Rachel immediately wiped her eyes. Nothing, sweetheart. But Ethan looked at the cassette recorder in my hand, then at the open box, and I saw realization spread slowly across his face. Not full understanding, but enough. What's on those tapes? He asked quietly. Rachel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I quickly stood. Just old conversations. With who silence? Ethan looked between us again, then finally asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. With Michael, Rachel shut her eyes. That alone gave him everything. I watched pain move across Ethan's face in real time. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just quiet heartbreak settling into a child already carrying too much. He knew about me before I was born, Ethan whispered. Not a question. A realization. Rachel began crying again. Yes. Ethan stood completely still for several seconds, then very softly, and he still left. I felt my own heart breaking all over again. Because there it was. The moment childhood finally died. The DNA test arrived on a Thursday morning. I stared at the sealed envelope for nearly 10 minutes before opening it. Part of me still feared certainty. As long as there remained even the smallest sliver of doubt, some fragile corner of my heart could keep pretending Michael wasn't fully responsible for this disaster. But deep down, I already knew. I'd known since the first moment Ethan smiled at me across the kitchen sink. Still, my hands shook opening the envelope. I sat alone in my office at the restaurant while breakfast customers laughed softly in the dining room outside. Ordinary life continued around me while mine quietly collapsed. The results were simple. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Michael Richardson was Ethan Bennett's biological father. I closed my eyes. Not because I was shocked, because finality hurts even when truth is expected. For a long time, I simply sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator outside my office door. Then suddenly I began crying. Not for Michael, not even for myself. For Ethan. Because somewhere across town sat a 14-year-old boy who spent half his childhood wondering why he wasn't enough for his own father to stay. And now science had confirmed what his heart already feared. He was abandoned knowingly, deliberately. I wiped my face and folded the papers carefully back into the envelope. Then my office phone rang. The timing startled me enough to make my pulse jump. Richardson's grill, I answered automatically. Chelsea. Michael. Cold dread moved instantly through me. How did you know I was here? I called the house first. His voice sounded tense, controlled, too controlled. I need to speak with you. About what I know you ordered a DNA test. My blood ran cold. How silence? Then calmly, I have connections. Of course he did. Law firms, private investigators, court access. The realization made me feel sick. You had people watching Rachel, I whispered. I had people protecting my family. Family. The irony almost made me laugh. You mean protecting yourself. I mean protecting all of us from a manipulative situation. I looked down at the DNA results again. Manipulative. Even now, Michael spoke about Rachel and Ethan like legal problems instead of human beings. The test confirmed he's your son. A long pause. Not denial this time, not anger, just silence. Then quietly, you shouldn't have done that. The response stunned me. Not, is he really mine? Not, oh God, not even regret, just irritation. Like I'd violated some business agreement. He's your child, I whispered. That doesn't mean you understand the full situation. I stood up slowly from my desk. What situation could possibly justify this you only know Rachel's version? I heard your voice on those tapes. Complete silence. So he didn't know about the recordings. Interesting. What tapes? He asked carefully. I ignored the question. She recorded conversations after you asked her to disappear. The silence that followed felt dangerous, not emotional, calculating. You need to stop involving yourself in this immediately. My stomach tightened. There it was again. That quiet threat hidden beneath polite words. Or what you could damage a lot of lives. No, Michael. You already did that 14 years ago. His breathing sharpened slightly. Then finally, for the first time since this nightmare began, emotion cracked through his polished voice. You think this has been easy for me? The selfishness of that sentence nearly took my breath away. Easy for him. Not Rachel surviving motel to motel. Not Ethan growing up fatherless. Him. I laughed softly in disbelief. You abandoned your son. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Then help me understand. I was building my career. Vanessa's family would have destroyed me if this came out back then. Destroyed. Always that word, like accountability was worse than cruelty. And now I ask coldly, what's your excuse now, Silence? Because there wasn't one. Finally, Michael spoke again, lower this time. What do they want? The question made something inside me harden permanently. Not. How is Ethan not as Rachel okay? What do they want? Money, scandal, damage. That's all he could imagine because that's how he viewed people now. They want nothing from you, I said quietly. That's the tragedy. He exhaled slowly. Good. The word disgusted me. Then Michael added, I can make sure they're financially taken care of. I nearly dropped the phone. You think this is about money? It solves most problems. No. No, it doesn't. Money buys silence sometimes. It doesn't erase abandonment. It doesn't repair childhood. It doesn't teach a boy why his father never loved him enough to stay. I spoke very carefully. You need to see Ethan. No. The speed of the answer shocked even me. He's 14 years old. I said no. Why? Another pause. Then quietly, because it would complicate things. I stared at the wall in horror. Complicate things. That child was not a human being to Michael anymore. He was risk, exposure, a threat to the life he built. And suddenly I understood something terrible. Michael wasn't avoiding Ethan because he felt guilty. He was avoiding him because Ethan made him feel vulnerable. That realization changed everything. Vanessa doesn't know, does she? I asked. His silence confirmed it immediately. She deserves the truth. No. The panic in his voice surfaced fast enough to surprise me. She's your wife. She doesn't need to know about mistakes from 15 years ago. Mistakes, not people. Mistakes. I closed my eyes briefly. You forged my signature. I handled a problem. You destroyed a woman's life. I protected my future. The words exploded from him this time. Raw, desperate, finally honest. Then silence crashed down between us again, because we both heard what he'd just admitted. I spoke softly. And what did it cost you for the first time? Michael didn't answer immediately. Long seconds passed. Then finally, in a voice suddenly sounding older than I'd ever heard before, more than you think. The sadness in that sentence caught me off guard. Not enough to excuse him, but enough to reveal something human still buried underneath all the selfishness. I almost responded. Almost. Then another voice interrupted everything. Mrs. Richardson, I turned. Denise stood in the office doorway looking pale. There's a woman here asking for Michael. My stomach tightened instantly. What woman? She says she's his wife. Oh, God. Vanessa. Michael heard enough through the phone to understand immediately. Do not tell her anything, he said sharply. Too late. Because behind Denise, I suddenly saw Vanessa Richardson standing in the hallway outside my office. Elegant cream coat, perfect hair, pearl earrings, and fear written all across her face. She'd heard enough already. Michael's voice still echoed through the phone, Mom, Mom. But I couldn't answer, because Vanessa stepped forward slowly and asked the question that changed everything. Who is Ethan Bennett? For a moment, nobody moved. Not me, not Vanessa. Not even Denise, standing awkwardly near the office doorway, pretending not to listen while clearly hearing every word. Michael's voice still came faintly through the phone. Mom. I slowly lowered it away from my ear. Vanessa's eyes dropped immediately to the DNA envelope sitting open on my desk, then to my face, then back to the phone, and in that instant I realized something important. She already suspected something. Maybe not the full truth, but enough. Chelsea, she said quietly, please don't lie to me. The fear in her voice startled me, not anger. Fear. Like she'd spent years sensing cracks beneath the perfect life Michael built around her. I finally ended the call. The silence afterward felt enormous. Denise wisely disappeared into the restaurant. Vanessa stepped fully into the office and closed the door behind her. Up close, she looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Her makeup was flawless, her posture elegant as always, but her eyes carried the strained look of a woman who hasn't slept properly in weeks. I gestured weakly toward the chair. She sat slowly, then asked again, Who is Ethan Bennett? I looked at the envelope on my desk. There are moments in life when truth becomes a door. Once opened, nothing behind it remains unchanged. This was one of those moments. I sat down across from her carefully. Michael had a relationship before he met you. Vanessa gave a small, humorless laugh. I know Rachel existed. That surprised me. He told me she was unstable, Vanessa continued quietly, that she became obsessed after the breakup. Of course he did. Women like Rachel are always called unstable when men need to erase them. I swallowed slowly. She had his child. Vanessa stopped breathing for a second. Not dramatically, just stillness. Like her body shut down, trying to absorb the sentence. Then finally, no. I pushed the DNA results toward her silently. Her hands trembled, picking them up. I watched her eyes move across the page. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. The color drained from her face completely. Oh my God. Tears filled her eyes instantly, but she blinked them back hard. How old is he? She whispered. 14. Her expression crumpled, because she understood the timeline immediately. Michael met Vanessa around 13 years ago, meaning he married her while knowingly hiding a child. Vanessa stared down at the papers like they physically hurt to touch. He told me Rachel lied about everything. I know. He said she tried trapping him. I closed my eyes briefly. Same script, same excuses. Vanessa suddenly looked up sharply. Does the boy know yes? Does he know Michael abandoned him intentionally? The room went silent. I answered honestly. He knows enough. Vanessa covered her mouth. And for the first time since I'd known her, all the polished perfection disappeared. No wealthy socialite, no elegant attorney's wife, just a wounded woman discovering her marriage was built on deception. He's been acting strange for months, she whispered. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He started locking his office at home, taking calls outside. She laughed bitterly through tears. I thought he was cheating. In a way he was. Not sexually, morally. Cheating her out of truth. Cheating Ethan out of fatherhood. Cheating Rachel out of dignity. Vanessa looked around the office slowly. I knew something was wrong, she admitted quietly. Michael hasn't been himself in years. That sentence caught my attention. What do you mean? Her eyes drifted toward the restaurant window. When we first met, he was warm. Funny. Ambitious, yes, but kind. Her voice weakened slightly. Then success changed him. I thought about Harold's words. Success became more important than character. Vanessa continued softly. He became obsessed with image, reputation, control. She swallowed hard. Sometimes I felt like I was married to a campaign instead of a person. Campaign. God. How many people had quietly noticed Michael becoming hollow while I kept refusing to see it? Vanessa looked back at the DNA test. Where are Rachel and Ethan now? At Memorial Hospital? Fear crossed her face instantly. She's sick, very. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Then quietly, Michael knows yes, and he still stayed away. Not a question. A realization. I nodded slowly. Tears finally escaped down Vanessa's face. I defended him, she whispered. So had I. That was the cruelest part. Good women had spent years helping Michael preserve the version of himself he wanted the world to see. Vanessa suddenly straightened slightly. Is there more? I hesitated. Then I reached into my desk drawer and removed copies of the forged letters and recordings transcripts I'd brought from home earlier. Vanessa read silently for several minutes. The office became so quiet I could hear forks clinking in the dining room outside. Then finally she whispered, "He forged your signature." Yes. She looked physically sick now, not because of scandal, because she was realizing the depth of Michael's deception. He made Rachel believe you hated her. Yes. Vanessa stared at one particular transcript page for a long time. Then softly, "He sounds so cold." That hurt unexpectedly, because hearing another person say it made the truth feel even more real. I watched her carefully. Did you know he could be like this? Vanessa's silence answered before she did. Then finally I knew he could be cruel when he felt threatened. Threatened. There it was again. Everything in Michael's life revolved around protecting status, protecting image, protecting himself. Vanessa wiped her eyes slowly. My father always loved Michael because he was ruthless. The word landed heavily between us. Ruthless. Not confident. Not driven. Ruthless. He used to call it leadership, Vanessa whispered bitterly. I guess now I know what he really meant. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then suddenly Vanessa looked at me with quiet desperation. What happens now? The question terrified me because I honestly didn't know. Expose Michael publicly, protect Ethan privately, force accountability, save what remained of our family. Every option felt painful. I don't know yet, I admitted. Vanessa nodded slowly like she expected that answer. Then, after a long silence, she quietly said something that stunned me. I want to meet Ethan. I blinked. What he deserves to know someone in this family sees him. Emotion rose sharply in my throat. Because despite everything, that sentence carried more compassion than Michael had shown in 14 years. Are you sure? I asked softly. No, Vanessa admitted honestly, but I think avoiding him would make me just as cowardly as Michael. The truth of that settled deeply inside me. Cowardice. That was the real disease underneath all of this. Not ambition, not status. Fear powerful enough to sacrifice other people. Vanessa stood slowly, then looked toward the DNA papers one last time. I keep thinking about that little boy growing up alone while Michael gave speeches about family values at charity events. Shame flooded through me. Because I attended those events. Clapped proudly. Smiled for photographs beside my successful son. Meanwhile, Rachel worked double shifts to keep Ethan fed. Vanessa picked up her purse carefully. When is the gala? I frowned slightly. What gala? The Whitmore Foundation dinner tomorrow night. Her expression hardened faintly. Michael's receiving an award for community leadership. Oh, God. I'd forgotten. Atlanta's biggest charity event of the year. Press, donors, judges, television cameras. Vanessa looked directly into my eyes and quietly asked the question that changed everything. What if the truth stopped hiding there? The Whitmore Foundation Gala looked exactly like the kind of event Michael loved. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, women in designer gowns pretending not to judge each other while judging everyone, men shaking hands like every conversation secretly involved money. The ballroom glittered with wealth so polished it almost felt artificial, and at the center of it all stood my son, Michael Richardson. Perfect tuxedo, perfect smile, perfect public image. A giant screen behind the stage displayed photographs of him volunteering beside children and speaking at charity events. Community Leadership Award. I stared at the screen and felt physically ill. Because somewhere across Atlanta, Rachel Bennett sat in a hospital bed worrying whether she'd survive long enough to see Ethan graduate high school, and Michael was being honored for compassion. Vanessa stood beside me near the ballroom entrance, silent and pale in a dark blue gown. She looked beautiful, but broken. You don't have to do this, I whispered. Her eyes stayed fixed on Michael across the room. Yes, she replied quietly, I do. Behind us stood Ethan. Nervous, overwhelmed, trying to act braver than any 14-year-old should have to be. He wore the nicest suit I could buy on short notice that afternoon, dark gray, slightly too big in the shoulders. He kept adjusting the cuffs anxiously, not because he cared about fashion, because he didn't feel like he belonged there. Rachel should have been with us, but her doctors refused to discharge her. Part of me felt relieved. This night was already cruel enough. Ethan looked around the ballroom uncertainly. So many people, he whispered. I touched his shoulder gently. You stay beside me. He nodded immediately. Across the room, Michael laughed at something a judge said while photographers snapped pictures around him. Then suddenly, he saw us. I will never forget the look on his face. Not guilt, not sadness, terror. Pure terror. The kind powerful people feel when the truth finally walks into the room uninvited. His smile vanished instantly. Vanessa inhaled shakily beside me. Wow, she whispered bitterly. He really is afraid. Michael excused himself from the crowd immediately and walked toward us fast. Too fast. Controlled panic hiding beneath polished manners. Mom, he said sharply once he reached us, what are you doing here? Then he noticed Ethan fully, and all color disappeared from his face. The ballroom noise faded around us. Michael stared at the boy. At his own face reflected 14 years younger. Same eyes, same jaw, same nervous habit of pressing lips together when anxious. Denial became impossible. Ethan looked up at him quietly. Not angry, not emotional. That somehow made it worse. Michael's voice dropped lower. You should not have brought him here. The sentence ignited something fierce inside me. Not, how are you? Not, are you okay? You should not have brought him here. Like Ethan was contamination. Vanessa stepped forward before I could speak. No, Michael, she said quietly. You should have brought him here years ago. Michael looked at her in shock. You knew I know everything. For 1 second I saw genuine panic crack through his carefully constructed composure. His eyes darted around the ballroom instinctively, checking who might hear. Always image first. Not here, he hissed. Ethan flinched slightly at the tone. I noticed. So did Vanessa. Michael noticed too late, and for the first time that evening shame flickered across his face. Small, quick, but real. Before anyone could speak again, the gala host's voice echoed across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, if everyone would please take their seats, we're ready to begin tonight's awards presentation. Applause erupted around us. Michael lowered his voice urgently. We'll discuss this privately. No, Vanessa replied immediately. Michael stared at her. She held his gaze steadily despite tears forming in her eyes. No more private lies. That sentence landed like a slap. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as guests moved toward their tables. Michael looked cornered now. Not by scandal. By truth. A photographer approached, smiling brightly. Mr. Richardson, quick photo before the ceremony. Michael immediately forced his public smile back into place. The transformation disgusted me. 1 second panic, next second polished charm. Like years of performance had become instinct. The photographer noticed Ethan standing beside us. And who's this young man? Silence. Heavy silence. Michael opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because for once, no rehearsed lie arrived fast enough. Ethan quietly answered himself. My name's Ethan Bennett. The photographer smiled politely, unaware of the explosion hidden inside those words. Nice to meet you, Ethan. He walked away. Michael turned toward Ethan sharply. You shouldn't use that name here. The cruelty of the sentence stunned even Vanessa. Ethan looked confused. It's my name. Michael closed his eyes briefly like he regretted the reaction instantly, but the damage was already done. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan protectively, and I realized something important. Michael saw scandal standing in front of him. We saw a child. The gala presentation finally began. Politicians gave speeches nobody listened to. Wealthy donors applauded themselves for generosity, while waiters carried expensive wine between tables, through all of it. Michael sat rigid beside Vanessa while Ethan and I occupied a table near the back. People kept glancing toward us curiously. Tension radiated off Michael strongly enough to feel across the room. Then finally came the award presentation. The host smiled brightly at the stage podium. And now the Whitmore Foundation proudly honors a man whose dedication to justice, ethics, and family values has inspired communities across Georgia. My stomach twisted. Ethics, family values. The hypocrisy felt unbearable. Michael walked onto the stage as applause thundered around the ballroom. Tall, confident, respected, the exact image he spent 15 years protecting. Then he began speaking. When people ask what matters most in life, he said smoothly, I always return to one answer: family. The word hit Ethan like a physical blow. I saw it happen. His shoulders tightened instantly, eyes lowering. Heartbreaking, because hearing abandonment wrapped in speeches about family was its own kind of cruelty. Michael continued calmly, True leadership begins at home. Vanessa suddenly stood up. The movement startled nearby tables immediately. Michael froze mid-sentence. The entire ballroom turned toward her. Vanessa looked at the stage with tears shining openly now. Then she said clearly enough for microphones to catch every word, Tell them about your son. Silence exploded across the room. Absolute silence. Michael went pale. Vanessa. Tell them, she repeated. People began whispering instantly, confused, uneasy. Michael forced a strained smile. My wife is upset. No, Vanessa interrupted sharply. I'm devastated. Every camera in the ballroom turned toward us now. Michael's breathing visibly changed. Then Ethan slowly stood beside me. The room became even quieter somehow. 14 years old, terrified, heartbroken, and still standing straighter than the grown man on stage. Michael stared at him in horror. Ethan's voice shook slightly when he spoke, but every word landed perfectly clear. You told my mom I ruined your future before I was even born. Gasps spread across the ballroom. Michael looked like the floor vanished beneath him, and for the first time in 15 years, the truth stopped hiding. The ballroom erupted instantly, whispers, gasps, phones lifting into the air, people turning toward one another with the hungry shock society reserves for public collapse. And at the center of it all stood my son, frozen beneath bright stage lights, while his carefully constructed life cracked open in front of hundreds of people. Michael gripped the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. Ethan, he said sharply, forcing calm into his voice. This is not the place for this conversation. But the performance no longer worked. Not after hearing the trembling honesty in a 14-year-old boy's voice. Not after Vanessa's tears. Not after the room sensed truth hiding underneath polished words. Ethan stood perfectly still beside me. You said my mom would ruin your future, he repeated quietly. Michael glanced around the ballroom desperately. Judges, politicians, business donors, reporters, every face watching him now. Every reputation he spent years building hanging by threads. Someone is manipulating this child, Michael said firmly into the microphone. That sentence changed something inside me permanently. Even now, even standing face to face with his own son, he chose self-protection first. Vanessa looked physically sick. No, she whispered. Stop lying. Michael turned toward her sharply. You don't understand what's happening? I understand perfectly. The ballroom had become deathly quiet. Nobody touched their food anymore. Nobody pretended this was still a charity gala. This had become judgment, and everyone knew it. I stood slowly from my chair. My knees shook. Not from fear, from grief. Because no mother imagines the day she'll have to expose her own child to save someone else's. But some truths become too expensive to keep buried. I reached into my purse carefully, then pulled out the folded DNA results. The room collectively inhaled. Michael's face drained completely. Mom, he whispered. The fear in his voice finally sounded real. Not fear for Ethan, fear for himself. I walked toward the stage slowly while cameras followed every step. For one brief second, I remembered Michael at 7 years old, standing proudly in a church Christmas play wearing a paper angel costume. He forgot his lines halfway through and burst into tears. I'd climbed onto that stage and held his tiny hand until he stopped shaking. Back then, protecting him felt natural. Tonight, protecting him would destroy innocent people all over again. So I kept walking. I climbed the stage steps carefully and stood beside my son beneath the harsh ballroom lights. Up close, he looked exhausted, cornered, human, but also deeply selfish. And maybe that combination was the real tragedy. I handed the DNA papers to the gala host silently. His confused expression vanished the second he read them. Then I spoke into the microphone. My name is Chelsea Richardson, I said shakily, and Michael Richardson is my son. The room stayed silent. He is also Ethan Bennett's father. A wave of whispers exploded instantly. Michael closed his eyes briefly like physical pain hit him. But I wasn't finished. 14 years ago, I continued, voice trembling harder. Now my son convinced a frightened pregnant woman to disappear because he believed she threatened his future. Vanessa began crying openly. Michael looked toward me desperately. "Mom, please." The plea almost destroyed me, because for 1 second I heard my little boy again. Not the lawyer, not the manipulator, just my child. And God help me. Part of me still loved him. That's the terrible thing about motherhood. Love doesn't disappear when disappointment arrives. It simply hurts more. I swallowed hard and continued anyway. He forged my signature on letters rejecting Rachel Bennett from our family. My voice cracked. He hid her letters to me for 15 years. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Someone near the front muttered, "My God." Michael stepped toward me suddenly. "You don't understand." "No," I interrupted quietly. "You don't." The room froze again. Because Michael Richardson, the respected attorney, the polished philanthropist, suddenly looked small beneath the weight of truth. Vanessa stepped onto the stage slowly beside us. Then she looked directly at the audience. "I married a man who preached integrity," she whispered. "But integrity performed in public means nothing if cruelty exists in private." The silence afterward felt enormous. One reporter near the front began typing furiously on his phone. Michael noticed. Panic flashed openly across his face now. "This is a private family matter," he snapped suddenly. "No," Ethan said quietly from below the stage. "It stopped being private when you abandoned us." The ballroom collectively turned toward him again. I watched grown adults struggle to meet that child's eyes, because shame becomes difficult to escape when innocence speaks plainly. Michael looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then finally something cracked. Not the performance. The man underneath it. "You think this was easy for me," he burst out suddenly. There it was again. Always himself first. Always his suffering, his pressure, his career. Never Rachel, never Ethan. The audience heard it too this time. I saw it in their faces. Disappointment replacing admiration. Vanessa whispered softly beside me. "He still doesn't get it." No, he didn't. Michael ran both hands through his hair, unraveling the perfect image further. "I was young," he said desperately. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes," Vanessa repeated through tears. "You abandoned a child for 14 years. I sent money." The room reacted visibly to that, because even strangers understood how ugly that sounded, as if checks could replace fatherhood. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. That small movement hurt me more than the shouting, because despite everything, part of him still wanted Michael to say something loving, anything loving. But Michael kept speaking like a man defending a lawsuit instead of facing his son. I didn't know how to fix it. "Then why didn't you try?" Ethan asked quietly. Silence. Pure devastating silence. Because there was no answer. Not one that wouldn't expose the truth completely. Michael looked at Ethan. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time in years. And I saw recognition finally land fully. His son. Not a problem, not a threat. His son. Tears filled Michael's eyes suddenly. Real tears. The first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all night. "I was scared," he whispered. The honesty stunned the room into silence again. Ethan's face tightened painfully. "So was Mom," he replied softly. But she stayed. God. That sentence shattered whatever remained of Michael's defense. He lowered his head completely, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked ashamed. Not caught. Ashamed. The ballroom remained utterly silent while Michael stood beneath bright lights with his entire life exposed around him. Then quietly, almost brokenly, he whispered the words he should have said 14 years earlier. "I'm sorry." But the tragedy was, some apologies arrived too late to save the people who needed them most. 6 months later, Richardson's grill smelled like cinnamon rolls again. For a while after the gala, I thought the restaurant would never feel normal. Reporters called for weeks. News stations replayed clips from the Whitmore Foundation dinner over and over again. Prominent Atlanta attorney exposed by mother during charity gala. Michael's law firm placed him on indefinite leave within 3 days. The State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation shortly afterward, after questions emerged about falsified documents and abuse of legal influence. Vanessa filed for divorce quietly. Not dramatically, not vindictively, just sadly. When she came by the restaurant one afternoon to sign paperwork with Michael, she looked 10 years older than before, but strangely freer too. "I spent years loving the version of him he wanted the world to see," she told me softly afterward while stirring untouched coffee. "I don't think even Michael knows who he really is anymore." I didn't argue, because the truth was, neither did I. Michael disappeared from public life almost completely after the scandal. No interviews, no charity boards, no gala speeches about family values. For months, I barely heard from him at all, and honestly, part of me needed that silence. Not because I stopped loving my son, but because loving him hurt differently now. You never fully recover from realizing your child became someone capable of cruelty. You simply learn how to carry the grief. Rachel eventually left the hospital after weeks of treatment. The pneumonia improved, but years of neglect had damaged her health badly. Recovery came slowly. Still, she smiled more, especially after Ethan stopped worrying about where they would sleep every night. I moved them into the apartment above the restaurant temporarily. Temporary quickly became permanent. The first morning, Ethan came downstairs before sunrise, asking if he could help prep vegetables for breakfast service. I nearly cried right there beside the industrial freezer. "You're supposed to sleep in," I told him. He shrugged. "I like being here." And for the first time in a very long time, I think he truly meant it. Richardson's grill slowly became home to him. Customers adored him almost immediately. Older church ladies slipped him $20 bills when they thought I wasn't looking. Construction workers taught him terrible jokes in the kitchen. Denise started bringing extra sandwiches accidentally every shift. People recognized goodness in him naturally. Maybe because pain had made him gentle instead of bitter. That's rare. Very rare. One afternoon, about 4 months after the gala, I found Ethan sitting alone in booth 7. The same booth where Rachel and Michael used to sit years ago. Sunlight spilled through the windows across his homework papers, while soft blues music played from the kitchen radio. For a moment he looked peaceful. Not watchful, not anxious, just 14. I sat across from him quietly. "What are you thinking about?" He hesitated. "Then finally my mom laughed today." I smiled softly. Rachel had laughed more lately, real laughs, not survival smiles. She said she forgot what safe feels like. He continued quietly. The sentence hit me straight in the heart. Safe. Such a simple thing. And yet so many people spend their entire lives without it. Ethan traced circles against the table with his fingertip. "Do you think people can change?" I knew immediately who he meant. "Michael." I took a slow breath. "I think people can," I said honestly, "but only if they stop lying to themselves first." Ethan nodded slowly. "He writes letters sometimes. I already knew." Michael mailed one nearly every week, not to me, to Ethan. At first, Ethan refused opening them. Then one day he started reading them privately upstairs. I never asked what they said. That belonged to them. Father and son. Broken things trying to understand whether healing remained possible. "Have you answered any?" I asked gently. "No. Why?" Ethan stared toward the kitchen quietly. "I don't know what to say." Fair enough. How does a child answer 14 years of absence? There aren't enough words for that kind of wound. That evening after closing, I walked upstairs carrying fresh towels and found Rachel sitting near the apartment window, watching rain fall over Savannah. Soft spring rain this time. Not the violent storm from the night Ethan first entered my restaurant. Funny how life circles back around. Rachel looked healthier now, stronger, color returning slowly to her face. But some sadness never fully leaves certain people. It simply learns better manners. "You okay?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "I was thinking about the first time Michael brought me here." My chest tightened gently. Me too. Rachel looked down toward the restaurant below us where Ethan laughed at something Denise said near the register. "He's happy here," she whispered. Yes. Tears filled her eyes suddenly. I used to pray for that every night. The raw honesty of motherhood always undoes me. Not wealth, not revenge, not justice, just happiness for your child. I sat beside her quietly. After a long silence, Rachel finally asked the question we'd both avoided for months. "How's Michael?" I stared out of the rain, lonely, because he was. No matter what anger remained between us, I could still recognize loneliness in my son. Michael eventually admitted publicly that Ethan was his child. Financial support followed. Legal accountability followed too. But consequences don't automatically create healing. Sometimes they simply leave people alone with the wreckage they caused. "I still remember the boy he used to be," Rachel whispered softly. I nodded. So do I. And maybe that was the saddest part of all. Not that Michael became cruel, but that somewhere underneath all the ambition and fear and selfishness, a good man once existed. Maybe he still did. Buried deeply, damaged, ashamed, trying to find his way back, That night after everyone went upstairs, Ethan stayed behind, helping me close the restaurant. He flipped chairs onto tables while I counted receipts. Ordinary, peaceful, safe. Finally, he walked over quietly and handed me the last coffee mug. Then he hesitated. "You know," he said softly, "I've been wanting to ask you something." I looked up. "What is it, sweetheart?" His eyes lowered nervously, and suddenly, despite everything he'd survived, he looked very young again. "Would it be okay if—" He swallowed hard. "If I called you Grandma?" The room blurred instantly through tears. I couldn't speak for a second. So instead I stood up and wrapped my arms around him tightly. And after 14 years of lies, abandonment, shame, and silence, our family finally began telling the truth. Sometimes the deepest heartbreak in life does not come from strangers. It comes from realizing that the people we love most are capable of hurting others in ways we never imagined. But this story is also a reminder that truth has a strange way of surviving, even after years of silence. Lies can hide for a season. Pride can bury guilt for a while. Success can distract the world. But eventually, the truth finds its voice. What moved me most about this journey was not Michael's downfall. It was Ethan's kindness. A boy who grew up rejected, poor, and invisible still chose to remain gentle. That is real strength. Pain can turn people cruel, but it can also turn people compassionate. And the people who choose compassion after suffering are some of the strongest souls in the world. Rachel's story reminds us that survival is not weakness. There are so many people silently carrying shame that never belonged to them. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply keep going one more day for the people they love. And Chelsea's journey teaches something many parents struggle to accept. Loving your child does not mean protecting their wrongdoing. Real love requires honesty. Sometimes accountability is the only path left toward healing. At the end of the story, the most important thing was not money, reputation, or public image. It was finally creating a place where truth could exist without fear, a place where a child could feel wanted, a place where broken people could begin healing together. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever discovered a painful truth about someone you loved? Or do you believe people can truly change after causing deep hurt? And if you enjoy emotional family drama stories like this, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know, and it helps these stories reach others who may need them too.